Hi guys, my name is Amish Tripathi and I'm the director of the Nehru Center. The Nehru Center is the cultural wing of the Indian High Commission in the UK, and we've been in existence for many decades, and we organize wonderful events at this very auditorium. You can register at for our newsletter at our website nehrucenter.org.uk. You don't need to write them down; they will be displayed at the bottom of the screen. You can also come to our Facebook page, which is a verified page, the Nehru Center. You can follow updates on all our events on Twitter as well, the Nehru Center. That's also a verified account. Or you can come to our YouTube channel. Again, the Nehru Center. We are nothing if not consistent. I hope you do come to our online channels and enjoy the events that we're putting up for you. Thank you so much for all your love and support. Namaste. Jai Hind.
Hi guys, my name is Amish Tripathi and I'm the director of the Nehru Center and Minister of Culture at the High Commission of India to the UK. In partnership with the ORF Delhi, the largest think tank in India, the Nehru Center is delighted to host this series of programs. We're going to have three programs: the Road to Glasgow, discussion to ideas to explore on what can be done towards the most important event that's coming up, COP26, to suggest ideas to the Indian government and to the UK government on what can be done to meet our climate goals. The three events that are going to be hosted on this platform, they will all be completed before the third week of October. And the first event will explore, which is what you will be seeing very shortly, greening the recovery. The pandemic has hit economies hard across the world, including in India and the UK, and the governments are seized of the very important issue right now of recovery, of pumping up the economy once again. And the idea is that can we use the effort that will go in to the recovery of the economy to build a green future as well? Net net, can we green the recovery? The second event, which will be the sequel to this event, which will occur in a few days, will explore a very important question of creating an Indo-UK research ecosystem to meet our climate goals. I think one thing that's very obvious is that if we have to meet our climate goals and ensure that global warming or climate change does not hit humanity hard, then even more than the very justified pressure of activists, what we need is the innovation of engineers and scientists. The Indo-UK research ecosystem has proven its efficiency in battling the pandemic, in the vaccines that emerged, the speed with which the research was done, the speed and efficiency with which manufacturing was done, and can we build a research ecosystem to help achieve our climate goals as well? Use the awesome talent of the scientists and engineers of India and UK. greening the around the end of the third week of October, we will explore on how to finance this green transition. The IPCC had estimated that we will need around $600 billion per year of investment to manage there is, of course, London is the international finance capital, and a large part of achieving these global green goals will be dictated by what happens in India. India is, after all, 1/5 of humanity. So therefore, is there a partnership possible between the financial powerhouse London and the economic powerhouse India to help achieve our climate goals? And can India and UK explore that should we set up a green bank, for example, to finance the green transition? These are the subjects that will be covered over these 3 events. And then at the end of this, a report will be created basis the deliberations that happens over these 3 events, and the report will be presented to the 2 co-chairs. We have among the finest co-chairs that one can think of for an issue such as this. Former Indian Minister Jayant Sinha is a co-chair of this series of seminars, and a member of the House of Lords in the UK, Lord Jitesh Gadhia, is a co-chair. So these reports will be presented to the 2 co-chairs, former Minister Jayant Sinha and Lord Jitesh Gadhia. Their inputs will be incorporated into the reports, and the reports will be presented to the India and UK government as a report titled Road to Glasgow, Action Plan for COP26. This is in sum, the series of events that we are looking at. And to take you through the first event, the very talented Mihir Sharma, if he can be brought up on stage, please. Hi, Mihir. How are you? Mihir, yeah, if I may. I'm sorry, Mihir. If I may do the introductions of Mihir. Mihir is the senior fellow of ORF, Observer Research Foundation, Delhi, and of course a journalist and a brilliant thinker whose writings I've always thoroughly enjoyed. Pleasure to have you on the Nehru Center platform, Mihir, and over to you.
Thank you, Amish, and thank you very much for helping set up what I hope will be a very, very interesting series of discussions. As Amish said, we have planned 3 of them, and this is going to be the first, and we have a very high-powered panel here to talk us through questions of how it is that we can ensure that our recovery from the pandemic globally, in India and in the UK and beyond, is such that the larger issues of climate change are also kept in the picture. Remember, we as countries begin to direct their efforts towards recovering from the pandemic, they also have to keep in mind that the new structures that they're putting into place for their economies are essentially ones also that will be able to ensure that we transition to greener economies effectively and swiftly. And in order to talk about how global cooperation factors into this effort, and how in particular India and the UK, as well as the broader Commonwealth, might be able to address these issues, I'm very happy to be able to welcome 4 panelists who will be able to think through these ideas with us today. The first 2 are going to be the co-chairs for our three talk series from the Nehru Center and ORF, and they are Lord Gadhia from the House of Lords of the United Kingdom, and Jayant Sinha, who is a Member of Parliament in India. And joining them shortly thereafter will be Shloka Nath, who is the Head of Sustainability, Policy and Advocacy at the Tata Trust, and also Acting CEO of the Indian Climate Collaborative, and Terri Chapman of ORF America. But we'll be going to the 2 of them in a bit. First, I'd like Lord Gadhia and Jayant Sinha to have a few words. Maybe, Jayant, if you could start us off with your thoughts on the subject.
Certainly, Mihir, and a very good evening to you, and a good morning to Lord Gadhia and to the other distinguished panelists. Very glad to see that the Nehru Center is organizing the series as a prelude to Glasgow. I think it's very timely. and the topics that you all have picked are absolutely spot on in terms of the major issues that we are confronting as we approach Glasgow. Now, this particular topic that we're dealing with today, which is the green recovery, is really the overarching theme that should really drive our perspectives on the green transformation. The very good news for India as far as moving towards a green future is that net zero for India is actually net positive. Net zero is net positive. And this challenges the conventional view that if India moves towards green technologies, that if India reduces carbon emissions, that it is going to impact our development and that it will set back our development, whether we look at it in terms of GDP or we look at it in terms of jobs or we look at it in terms of investments. In all of these cases, all the work that we are doing, where we are modeling the green transition, where we are modeling how the Indian economy can become a green economy, is showing us that GDP is going to be much higher if we go to net zero, that we will create a lot more jobs, and the quality of life is going to improve because we're going to rapidly and dramatically reduce air pollution as well. So net zero is net positive for India. And why it's important to get going on it immediately is because this is the decisive decade for India, both in terms of getting onto a different trajectory as far as carbon emissions is concerned, as well as in terms of creating jobs for our young workforce. Now, currently we are on a trajectory, the baseline that we are on right now as far as carbon emissions are concerned, shows that our carbon emissions continue to grow into the future. So it's not as if we're going to peak and then start to decline. The baseline case for India right now, even after meeting our Paris commitments and reaching 450 gigawatts of renewables, is such that our emissions continue to grow. So right now we are emitting about 3.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. Under the baseline case, the models are showing us that we will get to somewhere between, let's say, 6 to 8 billion tons. So even as the world gets to net zero or the world gets to zero, India, under its current business as usual baseline case, is headed to, let's say, 6 to 8 billion tons. So that obviously has to change. And it has to change now, because now is when we are putting in place the durable assets, the power plants, the electric vehicles, the buildings that are going to shape our carbon emissions going forward. And to change that, to bend the curve, if you will, on carbon emissions, we are going to require hundreds of billions of dollars of investments every year. The numbers are stark, the numbers are staggering. But the good news is that if we can make those investments happen, if we are going to go to completely renewables as far as our energy system is concerned, if we're going to move to electric transportation, if we're going to make our buildings a lot more energy efficient, we will also create a huge number of jobs. And right now we have a situation where we have a young population that's coming into the workforce. They need the jobs now. And so the green transformation, to bend the curve right now, is one that requires massive investments right now. And this is precisely when we need the jobs as well. So it's very fortuitous in terms of the timing. India is uniquely placed as far as the green transformation is concerned because we have the workforce, so that it is not going to drive up labor shortages or inflation or greenflation or whatever. We are also have a very high potential for renewables because of the amount of solar irradiation that we receive and the offshore wind that we have. So we have the potential to do it. And finally, we are also importing most of our fossil fuels. So for us, from a macro perspective, substituting for those fossil fuels, the $150 billion a year that we're importing of fossil fuels, is very positive for our macro economy as well. So when you look at all of these factors, you realize that it is a very good thing for us to really push green technologies right now. It really is going to be a very big positive for us. And I'll conclude again by saying that net zero is net positive for India, and it's net positive now, and we need to get going on it immediately. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jayant, for that very eloquent explanation as to why this is in many ways India's moment to seize if it really wishes to benefit from the green transformation, and indeed the notion that if it does seize the moment, it has a chance to, in some sense, restore its growth momentum, as you have so clearly put it. Net zero is positive. Lord Gadhia, I now turn to you. If you could give us some sense of how, what the possibilities are in this moment as we approach COP26. What are the possibilities for international cooperation, and between the UK and India in particular?
Thank you, Mihir. It's wonderful to be on this panel, especially with my parliamentary counterpart and friend from India, Jayant Sinha. And he's just given a very eloquent introduction. This trilogy of sessions ahead of COP26 couldn't be more timely, and with Amish Tripathi hosting us, who wouldn't appreciate trilogies? But by the time this broadcast is released, it will be less than a month from the gathering of world leaders in Glasgow to kick off a 2-week intensive multilateral process involving almost 200 countries. And yesterday, Alok Sharma, the COP26 president, who incidentally was born in Agra before arriving in the UK, confirmed that more than 100 heads of state or heads of government would attend the summit in person. And I very much hope that Prime Minister Modi will also confirm soon. He certainly has the scope to play a pivotal role, much as he did in the Paris Agreement in 2015. But the multilateral dimension aside, climate also features heavily in the UK-India bilateral axis. And in May this year, our two prime ministers elevated the relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership and launched a 2030 roadmap on India-UK future relations, of which climate is one of the 5 core pillars. So I very much look forward to unpacking the various dimensions of this with you in discussion, together with all the distinguished fellow panelists.
Thank you very much for that, and for that sense of how the moment is really vitally important and how it fits into the larger picture of India's bilateral relations. I think before I go back to the co-chairs and maybe ask them a couple of follow-up questions. I think it would be good if we introduced a few quick remarks from our other panelists, from Shloka Nath and also from Terri Chapman of ORF America. And I'm going to turn to Shloka Nath first and ask her perhaps if she could give us some sense of not just what the global partnerships here are that matter for India's green transition, but what about the other pools of money that could be put to work in combination with whatever is arranged at COP? For example, what's philanthropy doing?
Thanks, Mihir, and appreciate sort of the invite and the opportunity to talk about something that's so deeply important. This series by ORF could not be sort of more timely and appreciated. Your question is a great one. I think, of course, that there's a tremendous opportunity for international partnerships in this space. And I think the one thing that I've realized about discussions on green recovery that's sort of, incredibly prevalent is that they tend to be shorter term. But the Indian energy and industry transition really needs to be longer term. And green recovery is a very good entry point into the current situation in India, but we do need to think beyond the shorter term to really avoid those carbon intensive sectoral and technological lock-ins. And in terms of long-term economic recovery in the aftermath of the pandemic, the Indian government must extend and continue to support those policy and fiscal interventions which are aimed at de-risking investments, in sectors such as the renewable energy sector, for instance. So we know that, globally investors are looking for a very investable pipeline of green projects. And India has one of the most vibrant renewable energy markets globally, with, a tremendous sort of success rate of implementation of wind and solar projects. So policies that aim to be supportive for accelerating the growth of renewable energy in India, implementing industrial and building energy efficiencies, electric mobility, which of course our panelists before me have just mentioned. And looking to really reduce those harmful emissions is incredibly important. But those smaller project promoters, they really lack the capacity to prepare investment proposals. Or what we often see is that investors perceive a great amount of risk with higher or new and untested green technologies and unfamiliar business models. And so what ends up happening is even viable projects tend to fail, they fail to attract those necessary investments. So this is really where there's a role again for international partnerships, where international financial institutions can play a very important role in extending financial support to the renewable energy sector in India, especially during the recovery, and to really create that enabling environment for a low emissions pathway in some of our most crucial sectors. I've said this to you before, Mihir, and I'll say it again. I feel like a broken record at times, but we do really need a narrative change from ease of doing business to ease of doing climate. And that requires policy stability in this country, that requires a rethinking of our energy subsidies to prioritize clean energy access. It requires, aligned signaling between industry, policy, and finance, as well as a narrative, of course, that balances those crucial mitigation goals with the principles of inclusion and sustainability. There is a longer conversation, of course, about other pools of capital, specifically grant capital, but perhaps I can come back to that later in the panel.
Thank you very much to Shloka Nath for that, again, excellent explanation of exactly how it is, what the problems are that we have to overcome in many ways in order to particularly risk perceptions, in order to supercharge the amount of capital flowing into these crucial things. As Jayant said earlier, this is the moment when the infrastructure of the future is being built, and we have to try and make sure that it is as green as possible. I turn now to Terri Chapman, who will, I think, if we run us through maybe a couple of ways in which during this period of recovery, the UK and India can collaborate, perhaps on finance, but also on social resilience, which is in many ways very important to ensure that any transition is just as well as green.
Yeah, thank you, Mihir, and thank you to the Nehru Center, to my panelists, and to everyone who's joining us today for this discussion. As my fellow panelists have mentioned, the pandemic has sort of created an opportunity for change. It has been a period of loss and catastrophe. But out of such moments, we have the opportunity to change course. And at this moment, we have a renewed opportunity and renewed demand to change for the better, to make our cities healthier, to make our social protections more robust, to make our societies more equitable, and to chart out a different pathway that doesn't depend on fossil fuels. And I think India and the UK can be, great partners in these endeavors. And there's a few areas in particular where I think these two countries can sort of ramp up their efforts and sort of build on their complementary strengths. And three of those areas in particular are in education and human capital development, in finance, and in smart and green manufacturing. On the first, in fostering human capital development, it's possible to sort of build on the strengths of these two countries, right? London, as we know, is a global leader and a global hub for education, for knowledge, for innovation, for research. And India is one of the largest markets for higher education. Tertiary education enrollment in India has tripled in the last 2 decades. And it's still only at something like 30%. Half of India's population is below the age of 25, so we know that demand for higher education is going to increase. And we also know that demand for UK education opportunities in India are striking. There were 20,000 Tier 4 student visas given to Indian students in 2019, but that's still just a drop in the bucket, right? And so recent developments in Indian education policy are creating opportunities and making it more attractive for foreign universities to set up branch campuses in India. And this will create new space and new opportunities for greater access to high quality higher education in India, deepening UK-India scientific and academic collaborations, the establishment of new research centers, and greater innovation. And all of this can support a wider effort to increase human capital, skills, knowledge, all of which are are needed for the transition, India's transition towards a cleaner, greener, knowledge-based economy. Just quickly on the second point, I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration in finance. Obviously, mitigating climate change requires huge financial commitments. India's transition to renewable energies is going to cost something like $2.5 trillion until 2030. And we see that both public and private financing is obviously crucial for meeting these goals, and it's really the industrialized countries that need to meet that demand. But at the same time, a lot of financial institutions are not yet catering to broader transitions for which there's clearly a market. And more responsive sources of financing, new types of financial products, and more favorable borrowing terms for green investments are all needed to support the greener economy. And there appears to be a role for the UK financial sector in achieving that. And then finally, just a third point, I think there's sort of a strategic opportunity for the UK and India. We've seen through the pandemic the risks of over-reliance on a single country for the supply of any specific or crucial good. And China, for example, is the largest producer of solar and wind. It owns the largest solar and wind manufacturing companies. 80% of the world's solar panels come from China. And I think India offers an alternative and an option for diversifying and our supply chains and creating more resilience in the system. So I think this presents an opportunity for investing and building up India's smart and green manufacturing capabilities to create more robust supply chains for renewables and green technologies. So yes, over to you, Mihir.
Thank you. Thank you, Terri. And I think that you raised a couple of points, one of which, in fact, we are going to be trying to explore in some detail in the second of these two Nehru Center talks, which is the question of connecting our research establishments and connecting our, and forging a joint path in some sense when it comes to technological innovation in higher education. But I want to turn back now to Jayant Sinha and maybe ask him, in the sense, we've heard a lot about where India is and what the UK and India can do. Can you sort of run us through some of your ideas or some of your thoughts as to what are the ways in particular that maybe we can get a bridge for finance, of which, as we know, the UK is such, and London in particular, City of London in particular, is such a center for innovation when it comes to finance. What are the ways in which we can harness that innovative spirit and turn it towards funding and financing some of the projects that have been talked about so far in this discussion?
The UK and India have a tremendous opportunity to demonstrate global leadership through green finance, Mihir. The UK obviously is the leader when it comes to green finance, particularly on the fixed income side. And here there have already been many issuances of green bonds and other green financial instruments. The UK is also playing a very important role in establishing global carbon trading standards and emission standards as well, and developing exactly how carbon trading is going to happen, carbon credits are going to be exchanged across borders, is a very pivotal and important role for London to play as a global financial hub. And once that is done, then the potential for India to be able to reduce carbon emissions quickly and efficiently is probably higher than it is anywhere else in the world. So if you look for bang for the buck for green finance, India is the place to be. And that's why a partnership between the UK and India is so important, because the UK can lead the way in mobilizing that kind of green finance, and India can lead the way in terms of implementing it and reducing emissions very quickly. So that is a great bridging that is going to be possible between our two economies. And I'm not sure whether we need to necessarily create a green financial institution for that, because I think what's going to happen is that virtually all financial institutions are going to focus on green, because that's where we're going to have trillions of dollars of investment flows. So every bank, every financial institution, every investment bank, every asset manager is going to become green, in what they're doing. So we don't necessarily need specialized institutions, but we need the right standards. We need people to work together and collaborate to come up with innovative financial instruments. And then virtually everything we'll do after that will be part of the green transformation, because the scale that we need to do this at, and the kind of sectors of the economy that have to get involved, that pretty much ends up being virtually the entire economy as such. And so we all have to join forces, and we have to leverage what we are good at to really make this happen.
Thank you very much, Jayant. And I just want to ask you a 30-second follow-up, and then we'll move on, which is, what is it do you have some sense of what we in India ourselves can do to prepare ourselves, whether institutionally or otherwise, to receive what, if we play things right over the next year and a half, will be a flood of green capital or sustainable finance?
Well, it may or it may not be. It depends on the kind of investment environment that we create, right? And the kind of policy frameworks and policy predictability that we put in place. So what's very important for India, I think, is to declare an ambitious decarbonization goal. I would like to go all the way to net zero by 2050, because I think that will drive investment, that will drive policy predictability, that will drive accelerated action. So I would very much personally be in favor of net zero by 2050. But however we set the target up, it's very important that we have a policy framework that's supportive of deep decarbonization. When it comes to the energy system, particularly as far as electricity is concerned, when it comes to transportation, when it comes to major industries like cement and steel, when we think about buildings, these are the areas where we need to have the right policies in place, the right policy framework in place, so that capital will flow. There is no shortage of capital in the world right now. People are looking to invest, particularly when negative yield generating instruments are in the 12, 13, 15 trillion dollar range. So people are looking for good returns. People are looking for large scale investing opportunities, and India offers all of that. So what's most important for us to do is to provide the policy predictability, to provide the reassurance to investors that we are committed to a green transformation, that it is not a third or fourth or fifth priority, but it is in fact our most important priority. And as I said right at the outset, net zero is net positive for us, and it comes together very nicely because we need to bend the curve. We need to reduce carbon emissions. That will require hundreds of billions of dollars of investments very quickly, and at the same time we need to create jobs for our young people. So the moment is really opportune for us to really undertake this green transformation, and it's necessary and incumbent upon us, therefore, to create the policy framework, to send the policy signal, so that capital flows in, investors come in, and lots of new technologies take off, new entrepreneurs take off to really transform the economy.
Thank you very much, Jayant. And I think that's a wonderful summary of how it is that we can, ambition is its own reward sometimes. And definitely in this case, once we set a path for our greener future, it enthuses investors. It gives them a sense that they know what the future is. In many ways, it addresses part of the question of risk that was being raised earlier by Shloka Nath and others. So thank you very much, Jayant. I'm going to turn now to Lord Gadhia and ask him to maybe give us a sense of what are the ways in the past that the UK and India have collaborated on issues very much like this, to try and create a bridge for capital, to try and reduce the risk perceived by investors globally in economies like in India, and in questions such as green infrastructure. And in particular, what are the ways in which he sees that UK, innovative financial innovation can be harnessed, whether it has been in the past or will be in the future, towards helping the green transformation gather pace in other countries, including India?
Sure. Look, I think it's as Jayant knows, G to G, government to government sort of framework can operate at 30,000 degrees, and it's important to bring it down to the ground and anchor it in concrete activity. And I can definitely elaborate on some of what you just heard from Jayant and give you some, real tangible examples. So the first would be the Green Growth Equity Fund, which was initiated in 2018, anchored by both the UK and Indian governments, and it's since added more global investors, including BP, Eversource, which is the manager of the fund, and also recently the Dutch Development Bank, FMO, and it should reach £500 million by the end of this year, making it the largest single country emerging market climate fund in the world. So, and it's something that I'm pleased to have personally played a catalytic role in its formation. Just to give you a little bit of the history, it all came about following the 2015 budget from late Arun Jaitley, when he announced the creation of the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. And Jayant was actually the finance minister working with Arun Jaitley at the time. And on hearing this announcement, I suggested to the officials at the UK Treasury that we should partner on a joint fund, and it subsequently took shape. And this is a great example of how public finance can crowd in private capital at scale. Separately, I can give you another example, which is more of a direct sort of bilateral example of the UK deploying its own sort of firepower. So we have a organization called CDC, which is our development finance institution, and we've just committed to investing $1 billion in climate-related projects in India over the next 5 years, and this is on top of the $2 billion portfolio across many different sectors that CDC has in India. And just last month, the UK government supported the creation of the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative, India Partnership, which is a collaboration of a group of leading financial institutions responsible for $6.2 trillion of assets, which is chaired by Michael Bloomberg, and it got announced at the annual economic and financial dialogue between our two finance ministers. And maybe one last example is masala bonds, where the London Stock Exchange is the largest global center for these bonds, and something like over 13 billion pounds has been raised by Indian corporates in masala or dollar or green bonds over the last 5 years, including some notable firsts. So the first Indian rupee green bond issued anywhere in the world was done by IFC on the London Stock Exchange in 2015. The world's first green masala bond issued by an Indian entity, NTPC in this case, was launched in 2016, again on the London Stock Exchange. And just to give you a sense of the innovation even going on in the UK market for its own benefit, the UK just last week launched its own inaugural green government bond, which raised £10 billion. But we had orders of 100 billion, beating all previous records for UK government debt sales. So look, there is no better partner for financing green recovery. And I know that this is a theme that not only I think is relevant for this session, but I think we will come to later on in this series of webinars and explore further. So that's just a curtain raiser for you, Mihir.
Thank you very much. And I think on that note, the question of sort of financing, I'm going to ask Shloka Nath maybe to partly follow through on her thoughts a little earlier about what are the ways in which we can crowd in private capital, and what are the other pools of capital that can be put to work. And also, if you could then maybe take us towards a larger picture here, what are the ways in which we can build sustainability into our recovery more generally. Questions of it's not just mitigation that we are worried about in India, but also questions of adaptation, of creating more resilience in our communities. So is there a broader question of sustainability that we should also be looking at in this period when we are trying to design these financial instruments?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Mihir. Thank you for, punting that towards me, because I am really keen to talk about sort of those broader objectives as well. I think to your first point about sort of the other sources of capital, it's an important one because, our choices today in our recovery really define how soon we expect to see similar crises and how prepared and resilient we expect to be. And when we define a green recovery, we really talk about it in terms of one that prioritizes livelihoods, economies, as well as, of course, sustainability with a lens to justice and equity. And that has to be the mandate, going forward. And I think it's an opportunity for a new social contract between the state, the citizen, and the enterprise, one that really prioritizes jobs, growth, and of course, sustainability as well. There has to be, equitable support to targeted beneficiaries, use of new drivers of investment and growth, especially in smaller towns and rural areas. And of course, we have to invest in those sectors that are resilient against future shocks. And I always say that when it comes to grant capital, it plays a very powerful role in shaping national ambition. It was on the front lines of the immediate COVID-19 response, and it really has an important role to play in being a shaper of our long-term recovery. Some of the questions that we need to be asking now, and again, this ties into the role that grant capital really plays, is what are those needs of India's climate story? Are there solutions that can really drive measurable impact? Where can grant capital be instrumental, or private capital? And there are sectors and opportunities with tangible lever, which will provide tangible levers for a green recovery. But before I get into those, I do want to point out that, the phrase itself, green recovery, does connote a time frame. It's not an unending journey. It is about the decisions we are able to set in motion, the public as well as private funding decisions that we are able to influence today. And I think some of the questions, as I mentioned earlier, that we do need to be thinking about is, for instance, what would it look like for rural livelihoods to be supported by clean energy appliances? How could we have less drudgery in the sector? How could we produce less crop wastage? How could we have higher farm incomes through cold storage? On the other hand, are we asking questions around what adoption of renewable energy could do for MSMEs? How could this reduce emissions while lowering operating costs or spurring innovation? Could we, nudge policy in this regard as well as regulations and make Indian businesses more competitive? I think it really does come down to that as well. One more thing that I do want to pitch for or really put forward is the need for community-driven, nature-based solutions. It does have the potential to address, mitigation needs. It's incredibly sort of cost-effective in delivering those mitigation goals needed by 2030, along with, of course, the multiple adaptation benefits, especially for a developing country like ours. And not much attention has been given to this area, despite farming and agriculture as being an area that has really showed no contraction during COVID. It's kept livelihoods afloat, especially in the rural hinterlands. We at the ICC are developing a knowledge product in around nature-based solutions. It's an investment tool really to see if we could unlock finance for nature-based solutions for India, because I really do believe it has the potential to drive that green recovery within the Indian context. And again, I'll close on this, but I did want to mention that, the cold chains aspect that I mentioned earlier, as well as the MSME ideas, there's need for an ecosystem approach, which really aligns with the need for decentralized models. I think the one thing that COVID-19 has exposed is the fragility of centralized systems, and it's highlighted the need, as I said, for decentralized models for a green recovery. Whether it's food systems or energy systems, we do need to think about decentralizing them. And in order to mainstream those ideas, collaboration is going to be key within country, collaboration across actors and sectors, and of course across countries. We need to collaborate around technology, around skills, around capacity building, research, data, and of course finance and funding, so that we can create those jobs and bring equitable growth and of course foster sustainability. So I'll pause here and hand it back to you.
Thanks, Shloka. And I think that this is a good time to bring in Terri Chapman again and ask her, first, is there some sense, as Shloka Nath just explained to us, in which sustainable development can, financing sustainable development at the time of the recovery is a way in which we can build in a more effective response to a problem such as climate change? And after you've done with that, I have another one. I have another follow-up. So if you can take that one first.
Yeah, sure, Mihir, thank you. To reiterate Shloka's point, I think we need to have a broader focus on sustainable, equitable, and a just recovery. And there's an aspect to this that I'm particularly interested in, and I feel that is sometimes sort of underappreciated. And that's the way in which country actions, right, to reduce emissions, to achieve the SDGs, or their own, whatever kind of interests, have impacts in other countries. And I'll just give you an example of what I mean. Norway has invested heavily in renewables. I think more than 90% of the country's electricity comes from renewable sources. And Norway ranks 7th on the SDG index, right? And it's touted as a country that has achieved, great successes in sustainable development. But Norway is also a huge exporter of oil. And the emissions from Norway's exported oil are 10 times higher elsewhere than they are domestically. And what does this mean? This means that Norway is cleaning up its house at home while exporting the negative consequences of its sustainable development trajectory elsewhere. And this happens kind of across the board, from hydroelectric dams to the importing of high emission goods in high income countries. And so in the aggregate, what does this mean? It means that we can't achieve our climate or our sustainable development goals more broadly if we're shifting the burden of that process to other countries, especially poorer countries or countries with fewer resources to address them. And so I think, as we are looking into the recovery and, incorporating sustainability and climate change objectives into that recovery, I think we need to start truly accounting for the negative consequences of our actions at the global scale. And I think that building the partnerships and strengthening partnerships will be crucial for achieving that, so that countries aren't just acting unilaterally to improve their own conditions while exporting the negative parts of that process to other countries. Back to you, Mihir.
Thanks, Terri. And it's sort of, there are a bunch of issues there that I'm very interested in. The financial world is trying to work out, well, many in the financial world are trying to work out a system for accounting for their financed emissions. So, am I lending, if I am a bank, am I lending to a particular projects that actually go against my own net zero pledges, etc. So they want to try and create an accounting framework for that. The European Union, as we know, is trying to discuss a carbon tariff. Now, some of these may have overall positive outcomes, some of these may have problematic outcomes. We don't know, but it's definitely a conversation that we need to start having, because you're basically then getting into the larger question of what are if we take steps domestically to try and address the green transition, is it always going to be sufficient to ensure that globally we're addressing this problem well enough? And in fact, if we talk about the Green New Deals that are being discussed across the Western world, I think a lot of us in the developing world are always a little puzzled by this, because we look at this and we see, look at these Green New Deals and we see, oh, there's a lot of finance here that is being corralled away, and being corralled and being forced into maybe social projects at home, instead of being put to work in the geographies that need them, such as India, parts of Africa, and so on and so forth. And the proportion of the trillions of dollars that, for example, the U.S. government is setting aside for its various Green New Deal programs at the moment, that will actually spill over into the geographies that really need that capital is relatively small. So I think that there's really a question here that we need to start thinking about more closely. Lord Gadhia, then I think that we're getting close to our time for wrapping up. So maybe I'll ask you to give us your final thoughts here, and then I'll take us into the next couple of what we'll be discussing in the next sessions. We've heard a lot today about what finance can do. We've heard a lot about what are the reasons and what are the ways in the past that India and the UK can collaborate. We've heard a lot about, possible ways in which they can collaborate in the future. I was just hoping that maybe you could take us out of this discussion by giving us a sense of how we should, in the weeks that lead us towards the next conference of parties to COP26 in Glasgow, not allow us to get ourselves to maybe get too caught up in, the give and take of multilateral negotiations, because those can maybe overshadow the larger question that of climate change, which is staring us in the face.
Yeah, look, I think you're quite right. We don't want to let the high politics of climate diplomacy sort of overshadow some of the more solutions-oriented approach, which I think is, the instinct of not only many people on this panel, but I think of much of the private sector, that I think is very important to have at the table whenever you have these type of multilateral negotiations. And look, this whole issue of mobilizing the $100 billion per year of climate finance through to 2025 is something that will feature quite largely in COP26. But maybe I should just, to your point about taking a step back, to me, there's probably a moment to celebrate the tremendous things that we've already done. And, in the spirit of trilogies, I would characterize it as, we've already advanced the first frontier quite significantly. So if you look at today, solar in India, now you have, something like over 44 gigawatts of installed capacity, and you took a leadership position in forming the International Solar Alliance. If I look at the UK, we've taken a similar leadership position in wind power, and we have 25 gigawatts of installed capacity, of which 10 gigawatts is offshore, making us the largest producer of offshore wind, and that's going to quadruple in the next 10 years. So I do think that we can help each other, although obviously we don't have as much sun in this part of the world, so it may be slightly asymmetrical. But clearly India benefits from having an 8,000 kilometer coastline. I think the next frontier I see is hydrogen in both countries. And I note that in his Independence Day speech, Prime Minister Modi announced the National Hydrogen Mission. And we know that if anything is worthy or worth doing in India, it's always comes with a national mission. So I think it was great to see that. And the UK, also announced its hydrogen strategy in August. And we have the aim of 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen by 2030. And we've already, I think, started trials for the first hydrogen powered train on our mainline network. And I think India is doing the same. And then if you look forward, and this is sort of, in a way, taking some of the spirit of Bill Gates' recent book on climate, where he was putting quite a lot of faith in, technology coming forward with future solutions. Clearly, one of the sort of final frontiers is, and I think it's a question of when, not if, will be nuclear fusion. And clearly that's something that we in the UK are already investing in and looking at building prototype plants. So I sort of think that, we've got to, look at COP26 with all seriousness and be ambitious in making sure that it achieves and progresses the multilateral agenda. But there are so many exciting things that I think we can do both multilaterally and bilaterally between the UK and India over the coming years and decades.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that very optimistic and I really appreciate the optimism and the sort of forward-looking spirit with which you ended our discussion today. And thank you all of you who are listening for joining us. There are going to be 2 more in this series of panel discussions hosted by ORF and the Nehru Center in London. In these 2 discussions, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into some of the issues that were raised by our panelists today. The first will be on questions of how do we create a joint India and UK research ecosystem? How do we keep on getting ideas to flow seamlessly across the boundaries of our nations? How do we get people to collaborate with each other across India and Britain? And the final discussion will be again about questions that we've raised today, which is how is it that we can harness the financial innovation of the City of London in order to finance the green transformation of emerging economies like India. And these are things that we're going to be discussing over the next month in at least 2 sessions. But for now, I'd just like to thank our 2 co-chairs in this series of discussion, Lord Gadhia and Jayant Sinha. Thank you for your time. Thank you for leading us through these ideas. And thank you to Shloka Nath of the Indian Climate Collaborative and to Terri Chapman of ORF America for helping us think these issues through. And thank you all for joining us.